Talking today to Dr. Bill Nieberding of the SFA School of Art. And I'm curious to know, in your corner of the visual arts teaching and learning, what did you do in this second half of the semester when everything changed so much to keep the teaching and learning process going?
You know, as I mentioned, it was a darkroom class that I was teaching that kind of gave me the biggest issues. I had also some art education classes, but I've taught those online before, so that transition wasn't that big of a deal. And my other class was a digital photography class, so honestly, IT was amazingly helpful getting that up and running with Lightroom and things like that. But it was the darkroom class that kind of gave me the biggest concern because, you know, it's really a hands-on sort of class, which suddenly couldn't be. So I guess maybe the biggest thing I did was try to figure out what was the most essential sort of skills they needed to have now that everything was taken out of our hands. We couldn't use the cameras because they're film cameras. And I talked to Chris and he's like, well, maybe they can shoot film and mail it and you can develop it. But I decided to try to find a way to do this stuff on their camera phones if we possibly could. So I don't know if that begins to answer your question or not.
It does. Can you get into some more detail for us about how you continued to meet the learning goals of a darkroom class when the students were all in remote locations without even cameras, let alone darkrooms?
Yeah. So the first, so we had that sort of little section after spring break where it looked like maybe we were going to come back, but we weren't sure. And the depth of field project, which is sort of a really, I don't know who our audience is going to be. So the depth of field project is a really pretty technical assignment that you need, I guess, a real camera to do correctly. And since we didn't have that, I found a website which simulates depth of field so they could set up a shot which, you know, would, if they set, you know, a wide aperture, then the background would be blurry. And if they set a deep aperture, then the background would be sharp. And they kind of faked, you know, these photographs. And then they posted them up to a discussion board. And we talked about what went good and what went wrong. And that was a pretty good place to get it started. So that's where we started sort of as a stopgap measure. Let's just use a web app to kind of try to simulate a depth of field project.
It's incredible, some of the things I've been hearing about, the extremely detailed resources that are available on the web that I would never have imagined. And that's a website that it wouldn't have occurred to me to even look for such a thing. Were there other things that other resources that you found that helped finish the course successfully?
Oh yeah, quite a few. The real go-to for me, and actually in a couple different courses, has been this app called Snapseed, which is a free app from Google. And I guess the thing I like about it best is it's really similar both on the Android and on the iPhone. So we're all kind of working on the same platform no matter what phone you have. And it's got a pretty decent sort of dodge and burn function. And I guess that's the one thing we were about to get started with that in the darkroom is how do you make, it's pretty straightforward to make a black and white print. But then I guess I feel like the real question is how do you make a black and white print that does something, you know, that's expressive, that kind of has the feel you wanted it to have. And that's where we really get into burn and dodge as the technique for kind of manipulating the material so that final print looks the way you want it to look. And that's where Snapseed kind of stepped in, is it offers you, you know, with just your fingertip wiggling around on the phone screen, you know, how you can do pretty sophisticated burn and dodge techniques just with that app. And what surprised me is I had students shooting with real digital cameras that they have and then pulling the photos onto their phone and manipulating them in Snapseed and then taking them back off their phone. You know, so instead of like using Photoshop or Lightroom or something like that, we all use this sort of just really simple, basic app. And I think that worked well to kind of keep the focus on what do you want your picture to say more than, ooh, what can I do with the picture, you know, if that makes sense.
Sure. In these conversations, I've been intrigued to find that a lot of folks seem to have found ways in which the situation kind of catapulted us into the future in a way. And it sounds like this might be one of those cases. In my mind, I'm wondering if this wasn't a sudden opportunity for students to learn how to use digital photography in a way that makes their photographs seem to be film-based photographs.
Well, I think so. Yeah. And definitely allows them, even for their, little shots that are, I do this too. My little shots that go up on Instagram, you know what I mean? I can take a lot more ownership of those images by really kind of manipulating them to look exactly the way I want, with tonal contrast and burn and dodge. And Amanda, my colleague, tells me that frames around your photograph are sort of out of fashion, but I don't care. I really like them. I still want to, and it kind of just it allows them to sort of finish even sort of casual snapshots. So yeah, maybe that's sort of a good side effect of that.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you yet about what happened in this darkroom photography class that would be interesting for anyone watching this video to know?
Maybe the only thing that really sort of stood out was some of their projects, because the tools are so, I guess they're kind of primitive, you know what I mean? With Photoshop and Lightroom, you can do really precise selections. With Snapseed, it's kind of just like a, kind of rough burn and dodge. You can zoom quite a bit, but a lot of the photographs, particularly one student's project, had this real 1970s documentary kind of feel to it, because the burn and dodge just had that kind of, I hate to say antique because the 70s weren't that long ago, but that sort of vintage sort of feel. So I guess the outcome was maybe a little more surprising than I thought. I guess that's the project I'd focus on, because that's the one that went the best, rather than some of them were like, oh no, well, that didn't work, But we try stuff, and there you go.
Yeah, it's the nature of experimentation when necessity becomes the mother of invention, that some things are going to work better than others. Let me conclude by thanking you for not describing the period of my youth as antiquity. And thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us about this today. It's inspiring to hear what you and all of our colleagues have been doing to keep the teaching and learning and creating of art going at SFA. Thanks.
Well, it was my pleasure.